Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, episode 86, but more importantly, the Superman episode. Welcome to the first episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod post DCU launch. And I know, I've said it before, we all know, Creature Commandos was the official start of the DCU, but really, was it really? Was it really? Superman is the launch of the DCU, and we are doing our first episode after the first film in the DCU, after the new Superman film. A new era has been born. I'm being dramatic, obviously, but still, it's exciting. It's really exciting. So you will hear my review for Superman, non-spoiler and spoiler, later on in this episode. But a lot of things to talk about before then. We got some news about Dune 3, Batman 2, so fun things there, and some discussions about Marvel Phase 4. So I'm excited. I'm excited because, again, you'll hear my thoughts about Superman later on in the episode, but even before I had seen Superman, it's just an exciting time. You know, it's an exciting time to think about Superman, and Fantastic Four is coming up, and the DCU and the MCU are both hopefully on upswings, and it's just exciting for all of us. So I'm very, very thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for listening and watching. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, we are on the road to 2,000 subscribers. So if you could subscribe, make sure to leave a like. That would mean so much to me. Thank you guys so much for just continuing to engage. It is really one of the best parts of doing this. It's been so fun. So make sure to subscribe, give the video a like if you're listening, or if you want to listen to the audio-only platforms, the entire podcast comes out on the audio-only platforms first. That is Spotify, Overcast, and Apple Podcasts on Saturday mornings in the United States. So the full video version of the podcast usually comes out Monday or Tuesday, with the segments trickling out throughout the week. But if you want to hear the full cut of the Access Blockbusters Pod episode before any of that, it is out on Saturday mornings on those platforms. So make sure to leave a rating and let me know what you think about those audio versions of the podcast as well. And let us dive into today's topics. Alrighty guys, I wanted to make this segment because, frankly, this topic has been on my mind for quite a while now, and I decided I just wanted to talk about it because it's come up in conversation with other people over the past few months as the MCU's Phase 5 is closed out, and as we have a chance to look back on what has been a tumultuous time in the MCU. You know, I don't think that that's in any doubt, even for those of us like myself who really do enjoy a lot of what the MCU has produced in the past. Now, we've done our very extensive Phase 4 rewatch series. That was about a couple years ago at this point. So if you want to check out pretty much my most up-to-date thoughts, I know it's been about a year, but really I don't think my thoughts have changed too drastically on any of those projects. You can go check out any single one of those videos. We did it on every single movie, every single show, every single special presentation, as well as rankings, tier lists, and or I don't think tier lists this time, but rankings for sure, and then a couple extra video essays. And I think I want to focus in on those because in those video essays, I decided to rewrite Phase 4, and I did a separate segment, or a separate video, on what I think the biggest problems of Phase 4 are. But today, I wanted to think about, I have a thought, I have a theory, I have a thesis, and it's probably the title of this segment, and it is this. I think that Phase 4 is good, but I think that there are very valid reasons as to why we remember it as being bad. And when I say that, I want to be very clear, because I know that immediately people are going to jump to the comments and say, you know, if they see the title of Phase 4 is good, they're going to be like, no, I hate Phase 4. If you genuinely don't like the majority of Phase 4, if you genuinely just don't like it as a whole, I'm not here to convince you otherwise. That's not what this segment is about. So please hear me when I say that. That is not what this segment is about. I've done plenty of segments on this podcast. I've done plenty of videos on this YouTube channel where I talk about the fact that I think part of what makes this discussion and this community and this engagement so beautiful with, you know, the relationship that all of us have to individual movies and shows, what makes it so beautiful is that we come at it from very different perspectives. And I don't think that even though we can have discussions about it and debates, that doesn't negate that we each individually see these projects differently. So that's not what I'm saying. If you don't like Phase 4, I'm not trying to convince you otherwise. I'm just putting out here that my thesis, my thought, is that I do think Phase 4 is good in my eyes, and perhaps maybe for some of you who don't like Phase 4, better than you thought, better than we all collectively think. But I do think there is a reason we collectively don't like Phase 4. Phase 5 is a whole different story, and perhaps someday we'll do a Phase 5 rewatch. I've been teasing that for a while now, and we got to get through our Defenders rewatch. We got to finish up the DCE rewatch at a certain point. So it's a bit away. Probably won't happen for about a year or so, I would imagine. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that eventually. But anyways, Phase 4, I think, is better than we thought. Now, I just want to go through a quick exercise here and talk about, very quickly, just not objectively, because it's my subjective thoughts. That's a little bit ironic. But more so just taking a look back at every project in my eyes and how I felt about them. And I'm not going to give an overarching statement about Phase 4. I'm just going to talk about each individual project, and we can dissect and we can go from there. But I think that this exercise will kind of prove a point in my eyes, at least, and so we'll see how that shapes up. So first of all, WandaVision. I love WandaVision. I think it's amazing. I think WandaVision stacks up there with the best of the best of the best of the MCU. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I think, is okay, if not pretty watchable, pretty okay, with some pretty, noticeable flaws in my eyes, but it's okay. Loki Season 1, I think, is an unfinished show, but has all the potential in the world. It has all of the potential in the world, but it is, to me, a very unfinished show. Black Widow, I think, is decent. I think it's fine. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, right up there with any of the better MCU films in the Infinity Saga. Eternals, I think, is good. I actually really quite like Eternals, but we'll get back to that one. Hawkeye, quite enjoyable, in my opinion. Spider-Man, No Way Home, really, really good. Really, really good. Moon Knight, lots and lots of potential. Didn't quite execute on it, especially towards the end, but lots of potential. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It's fine. It's all right. It's entertaining. Miss Marvel, really liked it, except for a couple episodes and a couple things that they did towards the end. Thor: Love and Thunder, really don't like it. Thor: Love and Thunder might be... I wrestle with this now with The Incredible Hulk and Thor: Love and Thunder of which one is my least favorite MCU movie, but I think Thor: Love and Thunder is a little bit above The Incredible Hulk for me, but I really don't like the movie. She-Hulk: Attorney at Law, not my cup of tea, not my sense of humor. I think more enjoyable than holistically people think it is. People think, oh, this is the worst thing ever. It has its moments, but definitely not the show for me. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, love it. Really, really love it. And then the two special presentations in there, Guardians of the Galaxy, love it. Werewolf by Night, really like it. So taking a look back on that list, on balance, I think what you'll notice is that I quite enjoy most of these projects. I actually think that a lot of these projects are really good. Here's the reason, though. Here's my thought as to why, even though I like a lot of these projects, and in fact, in a heartbeat, I think I could rewatch any single one of them, even Thor: Love and Thunder, through gritted teeth, and She-Hulk: Attorney at Law. Probably the two least favorite projects on this list. Here's why I think we collectively look back on Phase 4 as worse than it perhaps is individually, if that makes sense. And that is consistency and firsts. So let me go through consistency to begin with. And I think that this one's pretty self-explanatory. One of the things about the MCU that made it, at least during the Infinity Saga, so incredible was how consistent it was. And that's not to say that every single project hit. But even the projects that weren't quite as good were still very consistent with one another. You had, for example, I think that the bottom tier of the Infinity Saga are still consistently entertaining and decent films. I would put projects like Captain Marvel, The Incredible Hulk. Actually, I would probably put those on the lower end. Captain Marvel, The Incredible Hulk, for example. But I think that the next level up of your Iron Man 3s, your Age of Ultrons, your Iron Man 2s, your Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2s, even though I kind of like that film. But you know what I mean? The projects that are on the next level up, your Thor: The Dark Worlds, I still think are consistent with the MCU. And I think that they're okay. They're not that bad, right? And I think that actually a lot of the films in Phase 4 and shows are on par with some of those projects. For example, I would put Doctor Strange and in the Multiverse of Madness on par with maybe an Iron Man 2 or even an Age of Ultron. Just entertaining. Iron Man 3 even. Entertaining film, right? Not too bad. Entertaining film. And had a lot of fun with it. And still do. But the problem is that Phase 4 was just wildly inconsistent. And I think that individually, that was a problem with different projects. I think Doctor Strange 2 was kind of all over the place, but still entertaining. I think that Thor: Love and Thunder was just wildly, trying to be too comedic. And then individual shows where you could even break it down by episode. I think certain episodes of Loki are great. Certain episodes of Moon Knight are great. Certain episodes of Miss Marvel and She-Hulk are great. But overall, just each show didn't consistently deliver. You can say what you want, but Thor: The Dark World, is consistent. Captain Marvel is consistent. The Incredible Hulk knows exactly what it wants to be. And I think that that is one thing that jarred us out of the state of, oh, wait, the MCU can just be inconsistent. Because one thing that I think jars us out of a state of neutrality, inertia, is when things aren't as we expect them to be, right? In fact, I think that that is perhaps sometimes more damaging than a project that we just don't like in particular. And that leads me to the next point, the second point, which is firsts. A lot of firsts happened in Phase 4, and I mean negative. For example, and this is a result of COVID, this is a result of the pandemic, but it still happened. Marvel had its first box office bombs. Because Phase 1, I don't think you can call those box office bombs, even though some of those movies didn't make a whole lot of money, objectively speaking, for the MCU standards, because it wasn't even the MCU as we know it, right? Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2, Incredible Hulk, and Thor, those projects weren't really what we know as the MCU. They were just individual projects that maybe were leading towards something, and probably were at a certain point, but still. So when Black Widow, or Shang-Chi, or Eternals didn't make a ton of money, people went, oh, I didn't know that could happen. And one could does wonder about what would happen if those projects came out right after Far From Home, but we'll never know. And then from there, we had hits like the $2 billion Spider-Man No Way Home, the almost $1 billion Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and the almost $1 billion Black Panther Wakanda Forever. But since then, it's become more common that, hey, well, maybe MCU films don't have to make a lot of money because that's just not what happens. That was a first. Another first. A rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. I genuinely think that even though Rotten Tomatoes is not a be-all, end-all for how we should view movies as audience members, it shouldn't be, it can't be, it really isn't. It is important, and perception is very important. And if a film has a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes, all of a sudden, boom, people think, uh-oh, what is this? The MCU before Phase 4, I think the lowest score was in the high 60s, if not low 70s. And most projects were hovering between 80 and 98% with Black Panther, I think. And honestly, I think about half the movies were in the 90s. It was, like I said, consistency. And Black Widow, to be fair, was up there. Shang-Chi was definitely up there. And then Eternals. Eternals was the first rotten film in the MCU. And since then, we've had Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and we've had Captain America: Brave New World. So my point here is that I do think Phase 4 is much better than we remember it being, but I think the perception with which we look back on it, I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, I'm saying it is what it is, in my opinion. And you'll let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with me. But I think the perception that, oh, the MCU sucked and the MCU is in such a downturn and whatnot, which I get. People tell me this all the time. Doesn't Marvel suck now? And why do you still watch it? I get it. I totally get it. I get it that some people who don't follow every single show and every single movie watched, I don't know, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and they were like, oh, what is this? I get it. Totally get it. I think on balance, though, Marvel did not take as big of a dip in quality as they, as people remember them taking. And obviously, quantity is perhaps the third unsaid reason here as well, that they just put out too much too fast. And that's obviously a whole separate thing that we talked about many, many times with Bob Chapek and Bob Iger and whatnot, with the CEOs of Disney. It's a whole thing. So that's also there. I think, though, that part of the reason is because, oh yeah, Marvel movies stopped making money, and Marvel movies, rotten scores. If you just look objectively, most of the films in Phase 4 have decent Rotten Tomatoes scores and made lots and lots and lots of money. Now, Phase 5, like I said, Phase 5, I think because of what happened in Phase 4, the rose-tinted glasses are gone. And I'm not saying that Phase 5's projects are not good, or are good, but we're just deluding ourselves. I'm not saying that at all. I don't like, not a decent bit, but certain parts of Phase 5 I don't love. And that's fine. It is what it is. But I think that because of what happened in Phase 4 and the perception that started to come out of Marvel is vulnerable. Marvel is not invincible. All of a sudden, things changed. That's my thesis. That's my thought. I think that if you take a look back at Phase 4, you'll find that you'd actually quite enjoy a decent bit of the projects once you take a look back at them again. That's my pitch. That's my thought. Anyways, guys, what do you think about this? I just wanted to talk about this because I think it's interesting, and just the way that we look back in hindsight and try to parse things through, always interesting to me. Let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, one of the MCU shows coming out next year, Daredevil Born Again Season 2. We haven't heard a whole lot about it. There was a time when we seemed to be getting set photo leaks and the like for every day, pretty much, for a couple weeks. But then we've gone pretty much radio silent, and we haven't heard all too much about Daredevil Born Again Season 2 in quite a while, which is fine. I think that it's great if the surprise is kept for a good while, considering that this show is probably not going to come out for at least, I would say at least 6, 7, 8 more months into 2026. But that's all good. And like I've been saying before, Daredevil Born Again Season 1 to me was a very conflicted show, literally, because it was chopped up and reshot and redone, rewritten, and kept some of the original parts of the show, the original DNA of the show that was originally pitched to Marvel, that was then scrapped and then rewritten and brought in new writers. And so it's a Frankenstein's monster, so to speak, but it still had really good elements, and it continued on with some of the great parts of the original Daredevil run. And that's why I have such hope and faith in Daredevil Born Again Season 2. And so, officially today, Darius Scartapane, who is the showrunner was the new showrunner for Daredevil Born Again Season 1 and is the showrunner for Daredevil Born Again Season 2, announced that the season had wrapped filming. Interestingly, because that's not necessarily news in itself, it's a good thing, right? It's, hopefully that this production is much smoother than the production for Season 1, and even if they go back for reshoots, that they're not going to reshoot the entire show and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully that, they have a really good sense of the story. And that's all well and good. One of the interesting things, though, that he did was, by name, explicitly thank a lot of the cast and the crew. And I say a lot because there are a couple notable omissions that I think are interesting. So the direct here has compiled 6 names that they think should have or will appear in Daredevil Born Again Season 2 that were not listed in the cast announcement. Now, it makes sense why almost all of these people, these actors, were not mentioned, although a couple of them, maybe it would have made more sense if they were. So let's run through these names that the direct has on here, and I'll give you my thoughts on whether or not I think they are probably in Daredevil Born Again Season 2. And the direct mentions as well, these are not all characters that they think will absolutely appear in the show, but rather some characters that we have received either implicit confirmation or explicit confirmation about, or characters that seem likely to show up. And I think they've gone from most likely to least likely, in my opinion. So starting at number 1, one of the actors that was not mentioned by name, Jon Bernthal. And I think we've gotten some kind of implicit confirmation that Punisher is going to show up in Daredevil Born Again Season 2. And I don't think that this has anything to do with Spider-Man Brand New Day, frankly, because that whole announcement and that whole deal was probably made while Daredevil Born Again was being filmed. Season 2 was being filmed, or at least in pretty deep in production. So I think they knew, regardless of Spider-Man Brand New Day, whether or not Punisher was going to show up. It's interesting. It's going to be interesting, side note, to see whether or not Spider-Man Brand New Day really acknowledges what happens in Daredevil Born Again Season 2 with Punisher in his own special presentation. That'll be super interesting. But Jon Bernthal's name was omitted. Does that mean that he has a much smaller role? I don't know what happens at the end of the special presentation. Maybe he's not in the show. I think there is a chance that he's not in the show because he's being set up for Spider-Man Brand New Day. We will see. Number 2 is Foggy, and this is another character, Eldon Henson, obviously, because, spoiler alert, Foggy died in the first episode of Daredevil Born Again Season 1. But the showrunner, I believe, said that he confirmed a while ago, we did a whole segment about this, that Eldon Henson would be returning as Foggy in Season 2, which is, in all likelihood, is flashbacks, and that makes a lot of sense. I would very much like to see flashbacks between him and Matt. They did a lot of that in Daredevil Season 1, I believe, so I would be very down for that. I think it makes sense that you wouldn't include his name, because then people would just be like, what? What's going on? So I think the rest of these names, honestly, are people's names that I wouldn't have expected to see in that Instagram post. But Jon Bernthal is an interesting one. Number 3, Luke Cage. Mike Coulter has been posting some things and hinting at Luke Cage, so we'll see. I would give Luke Cage maybe a 50-50 shot at this point. Before they announced Kristen Ritter was coming back, I would have given her maybe a 60-70% shot. Luke Cage, maybe 50%. So I don't think it's unlikely, but we'll see. We'll have to see about that. Iron Fist is in a similar vein, but obviously because, unfortunately people didn't like Finn Jones's performances as Danny Rand, that, I think it's a little less likely, and there hasn't been a whole lot of chatter about that. So it would be kind of unfortunate, though, if 3 of the 4 defenders showed up and Iron Fist didn't, but we'll just have to see how that goes. And the next one, Echo. I think Echo actually has a pretty decent shot of showing up here. I don't know why they would have announced that, though, at this point, so I think it makes sense. And the final one, I don't quite understand. Elektra, played by Elodie Young. I don't think she's going to show up. I think the character is dead. We'll see. Maybe they want to reintroduce her in the MCU somehow, and they'll bring her back because she is the canon version of Elektra in the MCU Sacred Timeline, because the Netflix show is now canon. So we'll see. But I think that, again, just what I wanted to highlight here, filming is done. Hopefully they'll have a very smooth post-production. We'll get a great season of television. And some of these characters that we just talked about, I have a feeling that it's not going to be 0. It's not going to be none of them that show up in Daredevil Born Again Season 2. I think we definitely will see 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 out of these 6 characters. So guys, what do you think about the news that Daredevil Born Again has wrapped filming? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, I didn't think originally when the Batman Part 1 finished up and when the Penguin finished up that Batman Part 2 would be such, I don't want to say a controversy, but such a topic of discussion. And yet here we are, because of different issues going on with Matt Reeves, and there's been speculation about his personal health and various reasons as to why the Batman Part 2 has been pushed and pushed and pushed, and now Batman Part 2 has a release date of October 2027, which is kind of crazy. I mean, you'd think that if the script is done, we'll talk about the script in just a second, that you could conceivably get going on the project in the near future, and perhaps maybe not October 2026, but still have the project up and running by late 2026 or early 2027. I digress. I know movie productions have a whole lot of different moving parts that need to be attended to, so it's not that easy. But October 2027 feels a long way away still for the Batman Part 2, because James Gunn, when doing press for Superman, which we'll talk about obviously later on in the podcast, was asked about Matt Reeves's The Batman Part 2 script, which has been a topic of discussion a few months ago. And basically, ever since, he's been saying, yeah, we're waiting for the script. It hasn't come yet. We're still waiting. Matt Reeves has yet to deliver it. And up until very recently, Matt Reeves has been pretty silent about this until he posted a picture of the script itself, saying, not obviously of the actual words, but just the fact that the script is there, it's present, it's done, and he said, we've submitted it to DC. And now, when doing press for Superman, James Gunn was asked about the Batman Part 2, to which he responds, he's read the script, and he says, quote, "It's great." Okay, so you might be wondering, why are we doing an entire segment about two words, which, if you're the CEO, the co-CEO of DC, obviously, you want to pump up your projects. Obviously, you want people to be excited about the things that you're working on. And so, of course, even though the Batman Part 2 is not part of the DCU, the universe set up by Creature Commandos and Superman, it's still James Gunn's in James Gunn's best interest to pump up the project and say, yeah, it's great. It's going great. Except the reason that we're doing this segment is because I do believe this is a sign of real positive momentum, because James Gunn, contrary to that kind of sentiment of where you might be saying, well, James Gunn should just say anything positive about the Batman 2, regardless. James Gunn, in taking over DC Studios, has actually been quite honest with us. Not revealing things necessarily, but has been pretty honest when it's come to his actual thoughts about these different projects. Case in point, whenever he's talking about the Batman Part 2, he's always been honest in saying, nope, we're still waiting for a script, and I'm sure it'll be great, but we're still waiting for it, and we haven't read it, and we don't know what's going on. Whenever he's been asked about it, that's what he's been saying. And so, and with other DC projects as well, that have been in limbo, he's also been very honest about the fact that some of these scripts are just not where he wants them to be. And I think that this actually points to James Gunn, now that he's saying, I've read the Batman Part 2 script, it's great, points to the fact that we are now full go on this. Whether or not Matt Reeves himself directs the movie is a different question for another day, but the script is done, and the script is good, and that means we are ready to go. Now, I don't believe James Gunn is just blustering about this. I do think that now, this is the point in time when we are really going to see the DC's Batman Part 2 have full momentum and full forward thrust into actual production. Like I said, with projects like, I think he said about Waller or The Authority, James Gunn has said, and even Batman Brave and the Bold, he's been very honest in saying, I'm just not happy with where these scripts are. And I have no reason to believe that when he says the Batman Part 2 script is great, I have no reason to believe he's lying about that. I think he's telling the truth, and I think that he really is excited about where this project is. So I take his comments about the Batman Part 2 script as a very, very good sign. And I do think we will be getting a lot of news about this in the coming weeks as we head into the future of what DC is having to offer for us. So guys, what do you think about the news that the Batman Part 2 script has been approved by James Gunn? Not only approved, but has been given a ringing endorsement from the co-CEO of DC Studios. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, we have a little bit of news here about Dune 3, and I'll admit, on the surface, it's not huge news, it's not earth-shattering news, but I think it is still news nonetheless worth talking about, and I think more importantly, what came along with this announcement, or, announcement by the major trades at the very least, is that Dune 3, and we'll talk about the official title in just a second, Dune 3 is going to be filming imminently. So it's going to be filming very, very soon, and it's going to be, I believe it has a release date of June 2026. or December 2026 or something like that. So it's coming out relatively soon. I think actually I was mistaken. The Odyssey has a release date of summer 2026, and I think Dune is coming out in December. Could be wrong about that. But anyways, let's get to the news here. Also, some images or speculation, because Timothée Chalamet, I think, just shaved his head. Apparently, that's not what the story is about, but who knows? Maybe a new look for Paul Atreides as Dune begins to film very soon. But Dune 3, I have been referring to as Dune Messiah for a long time, and I'm not alone in that. A lot of the major trades, just people online and everyone out there who knows about the Dune franchise has been referring to this as Dune Messiah, because Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 were an adaptation of the Frank Herbert original book, Dune. And while it wasn't, Dune the book isn't split into two parts, it's actually split into three parts. The two movies were definitively a story that was adapting that one singular book. And Denis Villeneuve actually said that in a previous interview that when he looks at these three films that he's doing, Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, and this upcoming film, Dune 3, he says he's not looking at it as a trilogy necessarily, but he's rather looking at it as Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 being part of one story, and then Dune 3 being a separate thing. And that, seemed to indicate that Dune 3 was going to be an adaptation of Dune Messiah. So we've all been calling it Dune Messiah. However, we actually have some news here that Dune 3 is not going to be called Dune Messiah, or even, Dune Part 3 Messiah, but it's going to be called just Dune Part 3. And I have to tell you guys, this, to me, is a no-brainer. For those of you who don't know, Dune, the first book, and I guess the first two movies now, follow the story of Paul Atreides and his, spoiler alert, his rise to power, essentially. And a lot of, that's such a simplistic explanation of what goes on there, but so many things are happening. But essentially, by the end of Dune, Paul Atreides is the emperor. And Dune Messiah picks up at a very interesting place. Again, no spoilers for Dune Messiah if you haven't read the book, or the adaptation, what's going to be the basis for the adaptation of Dune Part 3, presumably. And actually, we know that that's going to be the case, because this is maybe a minor spoiler, but Jason Momoa is going to be returning as Duncan Idaho. For those of you who watched Dune and Dune Part 2, you might be wondering how. It all will get explained in the third movie. But Dune Part 3, being an adaptation of Dune Messiah, picks up with Paul Atreides at a very interesting place. And it's a very singular story, although it obviously picks up with different things that happen after Dune. And so, to me, it's totally good if Denis Villeneuve is saying, I want Dune Part 3 to be something completely different and a separate story, because I think it should be if we were adapting Dune Messiah. I myself have read Dune, the first Dune and Dune Messiah, and I think Dune Messiah is very interesting. I think it's, not as good as the first Dune, but still a very interesting story to tell, and I'm curious to see what Denis Villeneuve does. They've already made deviations from where Dune Messiah picks up, or I guess we're calling it Dune Part 3, but Dune Messiah, the book picks up from the first Dune to where Dune Part 3 can pick up from the end of of Dune Part 2. So we'll see how those changes are affected, or affect the upcoming Dune Part 3. But to me, going back to what I said earlier, this is a no-brainer. And there's one very simple reason why. Marketing. Because let's be honest, right? Those of us who are in the pop culture zeitgeist, who understand and who know all these things, who have read Dune and Dune Messiah, know that there's Children of Dune and God Emperor of Dune, and know that, there's giant sandworms, and then there's peoples, and then there are people with sandworms, and sandworms with people's faces, and all these different things. For those of us who know this, if the movie comes out, and the first trailer comes out, and it says Dune Messiah, people are going to be like, what is that? And you might be able to intuit, pretty easily, based on what the people in the movies, and Zendaya and Florence Pugh and I almost said Tom Holland, Timothée Chalamet and whatnot. So that's it's probably not a big stretch. However, maybe there are big drastic character changes. Timothée Chalamet might be shaving his head. So to me, Dune Part 3, what Dune Part 3 very clearly indicates from a marketing point of view is that this is still, even though Denis Villeneuve says this is a separate story, this is still a part of the overarching story of Paul Atreides. And you should consider it as such. And that is a very smart thing to do, because the first two films have been met with critical acclaim, and they've done pretty well at the box office. The second one, much better than the first one. And so to consider it a part of that entire legacy of films, I think is a very clear reason why you would call it Dune Part 3 and not Dune Messiah, where people are going, what? Why Messiah? Messiah, obviously a very religious term. Why would you call it that? So to me, while, this isn't earth-shattering news, like I said, and this isn't something that's going to change the landscape of it, I just think it's an interesting exercise in marketing, actually, more than anything else. That's my best guess as to why the film got the title that it did. I have to say, If it was called Dune Messiah, would they have lost $100 million on the film? No, I don't think so. Even if the quality was the exact same as Dune Part 3? No, I don't think so. But we have an official title. Now it's going to be called Dune Part 3. So guys, what do you think of the fact that Dune Part 3 is officially titled and is going to be filming pretty soon? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, a little bit late to the party, but let's talk about Squid Game Season 3. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion because it's been enough time since the season actually came out, so I don't think I'll be doing a non-spoiler review for this. We'll just be jumping right into the spoiler discussion because, again, hopefully you guys have had time to watch the entire show. I've finally caught up and watched the entire show, I guess the entire show at this point. I think the Korean version is over at this point, and so the US version will be kicking up at some point, so we'll definitely be talking about that, especially with the ending of this show, this season rather. But again, this will be a full spoiler discussion for Season 3 of Squid Game. If you have not seen it, make sure to come back later once you have, and save the segment, save the podcast for later if you haven't. So let's dive right on in. Squid Game Season 3. Squid Game Season 3 is essentially Squid Game Season 2 Part 2. Because when we talked about Squid Game Season 2 earlier this year in January, I said that it was compelling, it was entertaining, it was tense, it was thrilling, but it was incomplete. And I was a little confused by the decision to make Squid Game Season 2 and Squid Game Season 3 into separate seasons. And after watching Squid Game Season 3, I am even more baffled by this decision because let's just dive right in. A lot of the things that carry over from Season 2 into Season 3 carry directly over, and they expect you to have a very clear memory of everything that happened in Season 2. When in reality, and maybe this is just my experience, you'll let me know in the comments down below if you felt any differently, I had completely forgotten about some of the side plots that were going on in this show. For example, the stuff with harvesting the organs, I had completely forgotten about that. Some of the side characters like Noelle, completely forgotten about all that sort of stuff that was going on. And then some of just the side characters in general, I think were, the just completely had forgotten about. I'm going to blank on these names because these are Korean names, and unfortunately I just was not able to get a good grasp on every single person's name in the show. But the player 222, who gave birth to her child and then died later on in the season, I had forgotten about her story arc and her being pregnant. I remembered vaguely pretty clearly actually the mother and son duo in the show, but there are just things in the season that I had just not remembered. And really what I did remember and what I was hoping for and what I was expecting heading into Season 3 was a big confrontation between the front man and Gi-hoon, right? I think that is what I thought this season was building towards. Spoiler alert, it's a spoiler discussion, that is not at all what happened in this season. And I hate to say it, as somebody who didn't necessarily have my doubts about the first season of Squid Game, when a show takes off with that kind of popularity, you almost wonder, is this too good to be true? Are people just jumping on the bandwagon because it's a popular thing? But I watched Season 1, maybe a month or so after it originally came out and became this pop culture phenomenon, and I was so impressed. I thought it was great. I really, really enjoyed it, and the surprises, the tension, the thrills, and whatnot. I thought this is such a great season of television. I enjoyed it, and I was very much looking forward to Season 2. When Season 2 came out, when the trailers for Season 2 came out, I was thinking to myself, well, this is odd, because, after the end of Season 1, I was thinking, okay, so now Gi-hoon has won the games, and he's going to, go after the people who made the games, and he's going to go confront the front man, and there's going to be this whole side plot with the front man's brother, and it's going to be really interesting. And then the trailer showed him right back in the games, and I was thinking, oh, odd. But, let everything happen and judge for it yourself once it does happen. And I did that, and I thought, okay, there's a pretty interesting and compelling reason as to why he's in the games. But like I said in my Season 2 review, once he is in the games, then it kind of just becomes a repeat of the first season. And Season 3 just carries that on. And so if you look at the overarching story of Season 2 and Season 3 as one story, it's just another Season 1. And that's disappointing to me because I had been expecting the show to kind of elevate. I'm not saying that they had to get rid of all the games in general. I'm not saying that that's what they needed to do. Not at all. But I think that what the show was asking for, the brunt of what the show was asking for after season 1, was an elevation of the stakes of Gi-hun saying, now I understand what's going on. Let's take down the games. And the way that season 3 ends, he has one pretty tense and pretty well done confrontation between him and the frontman, player 1 from season 2. And it was a good scene. It was a really good scene. And that's it. That is the last time they interact face to face. And that is bizarre to me. That is bizarre. Really what season 3 comes down to for me. Because honestly, I say all this kind of stuff, and ultimately how I would describe season 3 is anticlimactic and, yeah, disappointing. But I was entertained. I was pretty thoroughly entertained throughout the entire show, throughout the entire season. And you know when you use the phrase, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? What that indicates is that maybe on their own, these, whatever you're describing, if it's a movie, the individual characters or the story or a subplot just don't really seem to be working super well, but the movie in general is really good. I think Squid Game Season 3 is the opposite. I think the parts individually are much greater on their own than the sum that they created. I think that the games within Season 3 are still so well done and so well choreographed. The pacing is great, the tension is dynamic, and all of the machinations of which characters are going to make it with, all that stuff is really, really good. I really enjoyed it. The jump rope game, the Starry Night game, and then the final Squid Game. All of it, great. Really, really good. That is the draw of this show. It's the games, the Squid Games, right? And I get that. I get you don't want to abandon that. At the same time, what we're looking for at this point, especially at the end of season 2 when Gi-hun starts a mini rebellion within the Squid Games, is let's go. It's time to go. And he's just right back in the games. I get it. There are some very interesting things going on here. The baby angle, I thought, very interesting for a season of Squid Games that was not the final season, right? It's a very interesting angle to take. Player 333, was it 333? Yeah, 222 and 333. 333, the dad, the father, became a very vicious antagonist towards the end of the season, and a very well-realized character, or well-realized performance, I should say, because the character kind of, he didn't really have a whole lot of build-up there, but the performance and the tension at the end of the last game was great. It's just that this isn't what the season should have been about, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that as someone who had preconceived notions about it. I'm saying that as somebody who watched season 1 and season 2 and saw what they were building up towards, frankly, and setting up, and they didn't pay it off. I am frankly kind of baffled by the way that the season ended with Gi-hun. I get it, I'm not saying Gi-hun didn't, that his death was unnecessary or anything like that. I think he made a good sacrifice, and I do think the idea of sacrificing for the baby was an interesting one. But I think that part of what this season is that final confrontation, and it didn't happen. I even thought, okay, well, let's dive into the brothers' conflict with the front man and his brother, the detective Juno, and I that didn't amount to anything. They just saw each other at the very end, and then he gets the baby, and that's it. It's almost like this season was asking for, hey, we're gonna make a season 4, even though the creator of the show said we're not gonna do that. And it's weird, it's odd to me, and it's disappointing because I enjoyed the individual elements. The people who make the show, the people who write the scenes and the actors, they do such a good job. And it's just such a bummer to me that the overarching story above it all didn't really land. And it's such a bizarre thing, because usually you want to say, well, this thing here didn't work and this thing here didn't work, and overall it just made the whole season not feel as good. Or like I said earlier, you might have an opposite situation where the parts are not as great as the sum, where you go, yeah, it wasn't as great, but the overall product was pretty good. And in this case, I just have to say, while I enjoyed individual episodes and scenes and moments, I was just waiting for the season to take off, and it never ever did. I don't know if this benefits, if it would benefit from watching season 2 and season 3 combined. I don't know, maybe, but at this point I don't know if I'm ever gonna go back to these seasons, because I mean these episodes are hard watches too. I mean, we're talking about people's lives here, and it's not the kind of show where, yeah, let's do a rewatch of Squid Game and enjoy it and have a lot of fun. It's just it is what it is. It's just the nature of the show. But again, I mean, I don't know if Ki-yoon even had a character arc that much in this last season. Like, you know, we learned a lot more about him in season 2 and his sort of selfless nature, and that's great, and that's really, you know, it's really good and it's well done. But that was all season 2. Season 3, he spends the entire season, other than the games, handcuffed. And sure, I mean, he does some great stuff. You know, from the beginning of season 1 till the end of season 3, we see a huge character progression for Ki-hoon up until a sacrifice. But in season 3, what does he do? He doesn't do that much. So it's weird. It's really weird. I don't know what to make of this season, to be quite honest with you. I don't know, because I look back on my viewing experience and say, yeah, I was very entertained. But this season was, I can't really call it anything other than a disappointment. And that's really a bummer for me. We'll see about Squid Game US. Obviously, we had the Cate Blanchett cameo at the end. And we've been getting rumors about Squid Game US, which is interesting because when I looked it up, the creator of Squid Game, the original, or I guess this is the original show now, had said something bizarre, and he was like, no, Cate Blanchett is not part of I don't even know what this Squid Game US is. I heard rumors about it, but I have no idea. And I just wanted to include her in the ending. And I was like, that is such a bizarre thing to say when all the major trades said that David Fincher is developing Squid Game US, and then you end your show like this. It's a bizarre thing to say. I don't know I don't know. Is that true? That he genuinely didn't really intend Cate Blanchett to be a part of Squid Game US, and it ended up being that way? I have no idea. So it's weird. All of that stuff's kind of weird. It's disappointing for a show that had such a strong premise. And I would wager, you know, between seasons 1, 2, and 3, the first half of that entire story, season 1 and most of season 2, really strong, and then it just kind of fizzles out, and that's disappointing. So guys, what did you think of Squid Game season 3? Did you enjoy it more than I did? I hope you guys did. Let me know in the comments down below. Alright guys, there is no introduction that would suffice for this. Frankly, I've been thinking about this the entire way back after watching the movie, and this review, more than anything else, feels momentous. Not because it's going to change anyone's life or anything like that. No. But for me, it feels momentous. We made it. We watched Superman. Or I'm presuming we watched Superman. Maybe you haven't seen Superman, and if you haven't, welcome to the Access Blockbusters review, non-spoiler, and then spoiler, for James Gunn's Superman. And the reason this feels momentous is because this is the start of a new universe. Guys, I wasn't watching movies that much when the first Iron Man came out. I barely knew what was going on. I finally caught on when the first Avengers came out, and by that point, the MCU had already been going and was already a success. This is, and even Man of Steel, by the way. I didn't watch Man of Steel in theaters, but I did see Batman v Superman in theaters, and by that point, the DCEU was on its way. This is different. We are at the inception point of a brand new cinematic universe, the DCEU, and this is the first film in it. So like I said, this is going to be a non-spoiler and then spoiler review for James Gunn's 2025 Superman. We're going to go into non-spoilers first, and then when I give the clear delineation, so you will have no mistake, you will not mistake when the cutoff is, I will clearly say spoilers ahead, and then we will cut to spoilers. You can save the segment for later if you haven't seen the film and you don't want to be spoiled. So let's dive into Superman, starring David Cornsweet, Rachel Brosnahan, Nicholas Hoult, and many other fun characters. And for non-spoilers, by the way, just to preface this, I won't be spoiling anything that you haven't seen in the trailers, at the very least. And I'm talking about the main trailers. So, for example, Guy Gardner, a Green Lantern, is in the movie, the guy with the bowl cut. That's in every single trailer. You know, those kinds of things I will be talking about in so far as you have seen the trailers. That's about it. Anyways, let's get into the review. So I always like to start out my reviews because I think it's super important to preface anything that I say as somebody who's telling you my opinion about something, about what my expectations were going into the movie and where I was coming from. Because I think, I've always said this, the person who is reviewing, knowing their sensibilities, knowing their expectations, and knowing what they like, what they don't like, and what they were hoping for, I think is just as important as what they actually have to say. So for me, well, based on my YouTube channel, if it's your first time here, welcome. I love comic book movies. I love superhero movies, pop culture, and all that kind of stuff. I'm a big fan of the MCU. I like some of the DCEU films, but more so the auxiliary films like the Batman. I love the Batman. I just love fun movies, comic book movies, superhero movies. I believe in that they have such potential in the entertainment industry. Those people who are like, they're just trash movies and popcorn movies. I love superhero movies. And I know a lot of people have been just over the moon about all the Superman trailers and whatnot. And it's all on the channel. If you want to go back and see my reactions and thoughts on every single main Superman trailer, it's all there. It's all documented. I've liked them, but every single trailer has come with its caveats and hesitations on my part. James Gunn is a very, very talented storyteller. And when he pulls emotion out, he can really pull emotion out. But he also, for me, has been known, especially recently, to go a little bit too far. I think Creature Commandos was okay. And I think Creature Commandos was really James Gunn's R-rated, not goofy, but over-the-top sensibilities put to the max. I like the Suicide Squad. I actually quite like Peacemaker. Those are very different films, though they're very irreverent films. Even Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, when he pulls the emotion out, it is there, and it is strong, and it hits me really hard. But I do think some parts of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, for example, the scene on the couch where Drax is lying on the couch, it's just too much, a little bit over the top for me. So I was nervous. I was a little bit nervous, especially watching the trailers and going, there's a lot of comic bookiness going on. Guy Gardner's bowl cut, Mr. Terrific's mask, that's a tongue twister. Crypto the space dog, and all these different things. There are just things in there that make me go, I don't know. I'm really hoping for the best. And so I walked into Superman, again, really good reviews is what I heard, and really good reactions. I went into Superman with hope. And I like the movie. Now, it's hard for me because, well, it's not hard for me, but it's difficult for anybody, I should say, to kind of be in this middle ground, because the vast majority of the people, it seems like, love this movie. And that's amazing. I completely celebrate that. And I hope that everybody who went into Superman wanting to love it absolutely loved it. I do know also that there are going to be people who just hate the movie. Very small minority, I think, based on the reactions and whatnot. But, we saw that Daily Beast article, that Daily Beast review that leaked a couple days before the embargo lifted. And they're just going to be toxic fans who hate the movie for whatever reason. That is their prerogative, but it's also, we can ignore them. We don't have to listen to them. There are going to be people who hate the movie. I have a feeling, though, that if anybody says, I thought it was okay, that a lot of people are going to raise their eyebrows. And I'm not even there. I don't even think the movie is just okay. I like the movie. I do like the movie. I can't, though, as I was walking back from the theater, I can't bring myself to say I love it. And so let's dive into the reasons why. First of all, let's get into the cast, because I think the cast is really what holds the movie, or what could distinguish the movie, based on how good the cast is. David Gordon Sweat, I like as Superman, and I think that there are key pivotal moments that I found myself thinking, oh my gosh, that is Superman. There are other moments where I felt myself going, this is a character that still needs to grow in his character progression. And that's very intentional, by the way. I don't say that that's not intentional. That is a very intentional thing. James Gunn is specifically putting this version of Superman in a very specific point in his life, in the universe and whatnot. And that's good. That's good and all. But for me, as I'm watching that version of the character, who I do think grows by the end of the movie, I really do. But there are moments in the story where I'm going, yep, that's a version of Superman that we need to kind of get through, and then we'll head on into hopefully some better days. Now I say better days. I don't hate this version of Superman or anything. And again, like I said, there are moments in this movie where the camera is framed on him and he's talking, and I'm like, that is Superman, and I was so bought in. By the way, speaking of camera movements, one of the other things that I thought about a lot as well after the movie is just how competently shot and assuredly made this movie was. In terms of its cinematography, the shot compositions, there are a couple things like the way that he flies. Sometimes you see it in the trailers that James Gunn likes, the really close-up, almost GoPro angle. And that is what it is. And sometimes it works better than others, actually. But there are a couple scenes where I was like, well, yeah, a little too close to Superman. But again, most of the shots that were, the action sequences, the way that the camera is framed, the lighting, everything, all that kind of stuff, is it shows me that it's what sets this movie apart, from another director who might have just kind of done generic things with the camera. And I think that that's amazing. So I really, the way that they frame Superman throughout the movie is very, very intentional. And like I said, going back to David Gordon Sweat, I think that he, as Clark, is really good. Although, doesn't have a whole lot to do as Clark Kent. But as Superman, I think that there are moments that really show me this is going to be a great Superman. And more than anything else, I cannot wait to see him in the future as Superman. I think that where we leave him off at the end of the movie makes me go, yeah, let's really dive into Superman now. And I think that this is the first film. It's not an origin story like James Gunn has been saying, but it's a film that is exploring still a newer Superman. And I think that we just kind of have to go through the growing pains. Rachel Brosnahan is quite good as Lois Lane. And we all kind of thought she would be. She's quite good. She has, that journalistic streak in her at all times. And I think that there were a couple moments towards the middle and the end where I was a little bit worried of what are we doing with this character in the movie? But they managed to pull pull it in a way where at the end you understand what the core of her character is and why she's able to really make an impact in the story in a very specific way. And I really like that. I like their chemistry a lot. I like them a lot together. I like their relationship, actually. I like that, the chemistry aside, I like the way that the relationship was built up and written. And I think that there are a couple scenes where you're going, wow, that's an interesting way to approach that. But I think that the way that, they approach this relationship is a very real, true to life relationship. It works. It really does work. And the other third of this group is Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. Now, admittedly, there are a few moments, especially towards the end, where I was like, wow, this is a cartoon. And I don't necessarily mean that as a bad thing, surprisingly. It's odd because there are moments where I'm like, wow, this is really over the top. But it's never in a way where I'm saying, oh, that was terrible. It's just like, yeah, this is just the tone that this scene is embodying. The tones can kind of change scene to scene. But then there are other scenes where he's much more nuanced, I think, and much more grounded. And so I like his portrayal a lot. And I think that when you understand where he's coming from in his opposition to Superman, I think you understand him as a character. Obviously, like any good villain, you don't root for him, and you know that even though he might be justified in his own head, that his actions are indefensible and all those kinds of things. You totally understand that. But I think that as with many good villains, you understand why he's doing what he's doing. And I think that's all you can ask for. And I think obviously Nicholas Hoult, he's a fantastic actor. He did a great job. Speaking of tone, though, let's talk about the tone. So the movie has a very lighthearted tone in comparison to perhaps the other iterations of Superman, Man of Steel. And one thing I was worried about, like I mentioned before, I think James Gunn sometimes can go over the top. Sometimes James Gunn can be too goofy. And you might have heard in my segment we did in last week's episode of the Access Blockbusters pod where I was saying in my hopes, I hope it doesn't go too goofy. Again, Crypto being one of them. And I have to preface this, I love dogs, but Crypto, a dog with a cape and Superman collar, I don't know. I don't know about that. And to my surprise, the goofiness was absolutely not a problem in this movie. Am I going to say that every single joke landed for me? No. I'm not. There are actually a number of jokes that a couple people around me were chuckling at, and I found myself thinking, it didn't quite land for me. There are a couple that I did laugh out loud. The movie's not trying to be a comedy, though. I think in the way that if you watch Peacemaker Season 1, or if you watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 as a couple examples of recent James Gunn projects, you can tell there are moments of, peppered throughout each episode and each minute of the film where you go, oh, you're supposed to laugh at that, and that's a joke, and it's, those are built as comedies with heart underneath that. Superman is not built like that, and I am very, very relieved about that. This is not a film like Thor: Love and Thunder where every time they try to crack a joke, I'm like, why would we do that? It's not like that at all. Again, I'm not saying that this is the funniest movie. I really don't think that the ratio of jokes that landed versus not landing was super high for me in particular, and that's okay. It's not trying to be. There are funny moments, but it's not trying to be. And really what I appreciate the most about this movie are those moments when it's quieter, those moments when the humanity comes out of these characters. This is a movie that is not afraid to tell you what it's about. And I don't mean that in it beat you over the head of what the theme is or anything like that. Not at all. I think the movie knows exactly when to dial it up and when the characters need to explain and not explain, but more so showcase who they are and why they are the way that they are. And there are a couple really I don't want to say clever, but really interesting framing devices as to why Superman has to figure out who he really is. I think that is what this movie is about, is Superman trying to understand, who am I in this world? And there are a couple really interesting pivot points, moments, right, where throughout the movie where I was captivated. In fact, those were the moments, right? That entire framing of Superman thinking, who am I and who am I going to be? That is the core of the movie to me, and those were the parts that stood out the most, of him trying to figure that out. I think that is the strongest part of the movie. In between all of that, there's a lot of action, and there's a lot of craziness, and I'm not going to lie and say that all of it worked. Some of it didn't really work for me. There's some stuff in the middle in a particular location in the film where I was like, yeah, this is entertaining, but I don't know if I love this or not. But, there's some stuff that happens at the end, and there are just things with the action that's entertaining, right? So, to me, Superman, to wrap up my non-spoiler thoughts, alternates between being entertaining, right? And it's not like I was just hooked on everything that was going on, but just entertained by what was happening, to really hopeful and resonant. And it flickers between the two of those. And so when I walked out of Superman, I said, yeah, I liked it. And I'm excited to see where this iteration of Superman, where this world goes next, because it is a universe. It is a lived-in universe. And there's going to be a lot that happens in this universe, and I'm excited to see how Superman fits into all of that. I'm excited to see how the rest of the DCU fits into all of that, because this is going to grow. And to me, I think that is one of the best things I can say about Superman, is that it's a very good launching pad for what comes next. And I don't mean that in the sense of, oh yeah, Amazing Spider-Man 2, they just spent the entire movie setting up things. There are a couple scenes, admittedly, by the way, in this movie where I was like, that didn't need to be in the movie. It felt like it could have been a post-credit scene. That was just setting up something else. And that's fine. It is what it is. It's not going to ruin the movie or anything like that. But for me, just in general of feeling excited for this universe, because I admittedly did not feel that way after Creature Commandos. I was like, that was just James Gunn doing James Gunn things. And while this movie has James Gunn sensibilities in it, this movie did not feel like it was overpowered by him. And I think that is actually a really good thing. So those were my non-spoiler thoughts for Superman. I liked the movie. I'm not going to be one of those people who say this is the greatest thing that was ever made and invented next to sliced bread. I'm not going to say that this is my favorite comic book movie of all time. And that might be unpopular, but that's just how the movie hit me. So let's dive into the spoiler reviews for the spoiler section of this review. If you haven't seen Superman and you want to avoid spoilers, just make sure to save this segment, save this podcast or video wherever you are listening or watching for later, and then come back once you have. Let's dive into the spoilers final warning. I have a couple nitpicks, I'm not going to lie. And usually I'm not one to nitpick. There are just a couple things in this movie that I wanted to get off my chest here in the spoiler section that I couldn't talk about in the non-spoiler section. So one thing is, I totally get that metahumans have existed in this universe for a long time. Totally get that. That's not my gripe. I can totally buy in. I love world building. I can totally buy into the fact that, when Mr. Terrific or Guy Gardner or when the Justice Gang show up, everyone's like, yeah, Justice Gang, and nobody's like, what in the world is that? I can totally buy into that. Why is no one running when there is imminent danger in this movie? I think it's one thing, and again, I'm prefacing all this by saying it's a nitpick, so please bear with me for a couple seconds. We'll talk about more of the fun things later. So when buildings are about to fall, people are just standing around, and I get it that they're not surprised by metahumans, but what happened to self-preservation? There are so many scenes where I was like, the building just lit on fire, the building's about to collapse. Why are we standing? Anyways, that's just a nitpick. I like I said, I like Superman. And there are a couple things that, the other thing that I guess sort of irked me a little bit was the Millie Alcock Supergirl scene. Not because of anything within the scene. I thought that was one of the lines when she says bye to Superman. I'm not going to quote it because, family-friendly podcast. But when she says bye to Superman, I laughed out loud. That was really funny. Not Millie Alcock's performance in general. I actually think it's a very clever little twist that Crypto is her dog, because I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot more sense as to why he acts the way that he does, why perhaps he has a little cape on, because that just doesn't, it feels weird to me. It's still, like, none of those things, like Mr. Terrific's mask or Guy Gardner's bowl cut or whatever, which, by the way, Guy Gardner, I'll admit it, I thought Guy Gardner was going to really take me out of the movie, and he didn't. Nathan Fillion was great, and I can't wait to see him in Lanterns. That's the truth. I'm really happy to say that. But, Millie Alcock's scene, that felt very much like Joker, like Barry Keoghan's Joker in The Batman, where I was like, oh yeah, really interesting, really fun scene to set up what's coming next. But that could have been a post-credit scene, right? And I think that the only reason they probably kept that in as the main credit scene was because people didn't know a Supergirl movie was coming in all likelihood, and James Gunn probably in an effort to, again, I'm not blaming him for this, just kind of pointing out that in an effort to probably promote the next movie in the DCU, he was like, yep, let's kind of poke audiences and be like, hey, Supergirl's here and look forward to that. So that's my thought on what that was. But there was that. But yeah, I mean, I got a couple things right. And in my predictions, and I got a couple things wrong. I think one thing that I got very wrong was Ultraman, and I thought, first of all, I thought that Supergirl herself, going back to Supergirl, was going to be a pivotal part of the ending, and she just showed up for 5 seconds. The Ultraman part irks me also a little bit, and again, this is probably the last thing that I'll say that irked me, and then we'll kind of dive into some fun stuff. But it just irked me a little bit because I was hoping that Ultraman was going to be more than just a goon, and it turns out he is a clone of Superman who just shows up for 10 minutes at the end without his mask on. I don't know. I feel like you could have saved that for another movie or another part of Superman's journey, and it could have been something interesting where he cloned Superman, because that is something very Lex Luthor, right? That's something he does all the time in the comics. But, you know, it just felt a little bit strange to just throw that in at the very end without even having a point, because there could have been a big philosophical thing there about how this is a reflection of you and, you know, this guy and whatnot. But, you know, Lex was just like, this is a dumber version of you, but he's stronger. And I was like, all right. But anyways, yeah, again, the scenes that I really enjoyed and the things that really hooked me, the part about Jor-El, and I always forget what Superman's mom's name is, but Superman's kryptonite parents, Bradley Cooper, by the way, fun cameo, the message part. And the fact that he really clung to that first half of the message and didn't realize what the second half of the message. And I loved, by the way, that the second half of the message, as far as we know, wasn't doctored. That truly was what the command was from Jor-El, is to conquer and his mom, to rule. And I think that creates such an interesting dichotomy, which pays off in such a beautiful way. The scene with Clark Kent and Pa Kent on the farm is, to me, I think the best scene in the movie. That it's when Pa Kent says, and I'm getting a little emotional just thinking about it, that to me, where he says something to the effect of, you know, parents can't wrangle in their kids. We just give you the tools to live it out. And he says, I couldn't be prouder of the man you are. That to me, and James Gunn understands this. He knows that that's not just a lucky scene that he got in the middle there with, oh, you know, let's make the audience cry, because the last scene of the movie is Superman calling out to his parents or looking for the parents' videos and seeing his childhood videos in Canada. That is Superman. That is Superman. James Gunn got it. Again, in between all of that, there's the giant kaiju monster, which that fight was fun and fine. There is the stuff in the Pocket universe, which was interesting. Honestly, the stuff with Metamorpho there, where he turns into a giant squid thing, and the baby, that stuff to me was probably some of the weaker stuff in the movie. It just felt a little bit too ridiculous. Like I said, James Gunn did a pretty good job of not going way over the top. I really liked Mr. Terrific. I liked Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl. I liked Metamorpho later on in the movie, actually. I liked Lex. What I really liked about Lex at the very end, too, is the whole philosophy behind Lex Luthor. He's just a human, right? But his nemesis is basically the god of that universe. He's Superman. And I loved how he was using the commands at the very end, almost like he was the one punching Superman with Ultraman at the commands. Because the commands were kind of goofy throughout. I was like, this is way too gamer vibes. I don't know what the point of this is, but the payoff to having Lex basically be the one beating up Superman at the very end, that was great. That was really great. The stuff in the Pocket dimension, I will say, a little bit too over the top for me. But again, it's these moments in between. It's that moment when Superman hugs Lois before he flies off and turns himself into the DOJ. And all that stuff is happening in the background in the window, which is a really funny scene, by the way. But that hug where he says, I love you, that's chemistry. It's beautiful. I thought he was being a little bit more of that naive, like, he needs to grow up a little bit Superman, which, again, is fine. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just not the version of Superman that I would want to see for the next 20 years, right? When he's doing the interview and he's like, no, you don't understand. That's, again, it's okay. It's totally okay. But the version of Superman that I think I'm really going to grow to love is there towards the end of the movie. And I really appreciate that. So I could say a whole lot more about this movie. And it's a movie that I wonder if it will grow on me a lot more as time goes on. I don't know. Second acts are hard to nail. And I will say the second act of this movie is probably the weaker part, in my opinion. The first act was a little shaky. It got there, though. By the time they get to the scene with the message, right, where the message is intercepted, that was great. That's when the movie really took off for me. The engineer, she is whatever. Like, I wasn't super memorable in my eyes, but again, I liked the movie. I'm not gonna come out here and say, like I said, this is the best movie I've ever seen, but I'm really hopeful, and that's ironic, right? Because that's what the message of the movie is. It's about hope, and I'm very hopeful for the future of this universe with this character in it. So those are my thoughts on Superman, guys. I'm assuming if you are here, you've seen Superman. What did you think about it? Did you love the movie? I really hope you did. Let me know in the comments down below. And guys, that will do it for episode number 86 of the Access Blockbusters pod. Again, the first episode post-Superman. What a time we live in. I can't believe it has already come and gone, and we're already looking forward to Peacemaker Season 2. It is off to the races, guys, off to the races. So thank you so much for joining us on the Access Blockbusters pod. If you're watching on YouTube, we're on the road to 2,000 subscribers, so thank you so much. And please make sure to subscribe and give the video a like if you could. Thank you so much again for all of your support. And in the meantime, guys, check out the audio-only platform as well. And I will see you guys in the next one.